That was a really good episode we just recorded with Tim, Dan. I met Tim at Measure Camp and he spoke at Crap Talks, and then I believe you'd met him at Measure Camp as well. And I think I really like speaking to Tim, and I really like hearing from him. He's an eccentric fellow who has all of these wacky and wonderful ideas, and he presents them in a way that's always hilarious. It was really nice to have him on the show. How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it went really well. And if you're listening to this episode, you probably know the title of the episode being The Psychology of Data. And that's exactly what we jumped straight into. So we do the howdy do's in terms of how we know each other. And then it's really interesting hearing his backstory and how he found his way into being a CMO and the kind of ideas and the approaches to kind of data storytelling and the presentation and the integration of the kind of creativity into the world that's very statistical and often not thought as creative, I think was really enlightening. There's a number of links that we talk about in this, so be sure to check out the show notes. Not only the talk that he did at the Crap Talks from a couple of years ago is recorded on YouTube, so we'll put that there, all the links to the references that he mentions around the books, the blogs, the podcasts, and of course we'll link off to Tim himself on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get in touch with him. The last thing to note is that we are on YouTube. So if you're listening to this, you could watch us if you want to. We're over there, and be sure to check those show notes page out again for the Crap Talks Slack community, as well as we've got a form on there. I've built a Looker Studio dashboard looking at the stats of this podcast over time, and there's a page on there that also has a feedback form. So if you want to come on and share an opinion, if you think you know someone that would be good for us to talk to, or even just have a subject you want to throw into the ring for us to talk about, please do so. One last thing to mention, there's no Dara this episode. He's on holiday, so he's having a great time over there. So me and Bav took this one solo. So hopefully I did an all right job picking up the reins with the rapid fire at the end and whatnot. But anyway, I hope you enjoy the show. Today we've got a special guest, Tim Ceuppens. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. I did have a practice go just before we clicked record. So welcome, Tim. Thanks for being here. It's really good to have you.
Hi, welcome. It's nice to be here. I've listened a few times, listened to a few episodes. So I'm the one listener from Belgium, probably. So yeah.
That's why we invite people on to guest, is so that they actually increase our listenership on the back catalogue. That's the only reason.
See, this is why they say, like, when a metric becomes a KPI, it ceases to be a good indicator.
Well, Tim, thanks for coming on. We've been trying to get this booked in for a little while now. So me and you, we connected at Measure Camp London, which was the back end of September 2023. And I put a little post-it note up on a little community wall that was just like, hey, there's a podcast that I co-host and it would be good to talk to interesting people. And you were one of them. So it was just really interesting that worked. And I like that little community wall. So thanks for your patience as well, getting this in the calendar. We've been wanting to talk to you for a while. It's just arranging calendars with this many people is always a nightmare.
That's just fine. It's okay.
And it's not actually the first time we've connected, though, is it, Tim? You were kind enough to speak at a Crap Talks event in the back end of 2022, I think. Again, shortly after you and I connected at Measure Camp, I was watching your talk on data presentation, which made me laugh so much. I don't think I've laughed so much in a data talk before. So I couldn't help but invite you to speak at Crap Talks event.
And that was also a very, very interesting experience for me. I think it was in July. So it was great weather. There was sun. I don't know. People in London kept looking up at the sky. What is this thing? But but no, it was great. It was great to be there and give the talk and obviously meet you as well. Yeah.
Well, Tim, let's pull back slightly. So we know each other. Bav knows you. I know Bav, and so we're connected. Let's pull back and for people that haven't come across you before, we always like to let our guests introduce themselves, to do their own kind of backstory, their origin story in terms of how they found themselves in the world of analytics, and ultimately speaking to people like me and Bav on a podcast all about analytics. So give us the long version, the short version. It's up to you. How did you get here?
So basically, I started a long time ago doing film school. Obviously, as everyone who does analytics and data does, I think. So I was really looking forward to telling stories. It became quickly apparent that there's like a top layer that you need to achieve in order to make films, and that I wasn't in that layer. And so I had to actually start doing things to make money. And so I ended up in marketing because I knew a little bit of digital, I knew a bit of websites. And this is the days of the Wild West where everyone was going like, oh, you know websites. You must come to our office. Here is a job. And so it just grew from there. So it was very natural. I started doing SEO because I did SEO. I did Google Ads because I did Google Ads. I started doing Google Analytics because I did Google Analytics and all the other things. I did conversion rate optimization. And then just basically over the next 15 years, learned everything that there is to know on marketing on the job. Until right now, I'm the chief marketing officer for Belgium and Netherlands' largest health food store. So that's a fun thing to do. An interesting career progression coming from obviously not being the next Chris Nolan to this. But it's just fun as well. So yeah. I still get to tell stories. So yeah.
Tim, I remember when you told me that you just landed the job as the CMO at, I think it was Measure Camp just gone recently, and it hadn't been fully announced. And I was amazed at your sort of professional journey that you've been on, from the fact that you started in film, which that bit I actually didn't know, to then sort of like transition through the world of digital marketing, analytics, and then end up as a CMO of it's a health foods.
Yeah, obviously, if you look at me, right? It's exactly the sort of audience
of course,
that you would expect for
the poster child. Me
poster child. Yeah. So every day I do at least 20 push-ups. So no, it's an interesting it's an interesting journey. But yeah, you just basically pick up all the things that you need to know, and at a certain point, so the previous CMO was thinking about leaving. I met her actually at a Measure Camp, and she just basically called me up one day and said, I'm thinking about leaving here because it's not exactly a match with what I want to do. And I think listening to you speak and the conversations that we had, this will be right up your alley. And it turned out that was the case. So I'm having a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's amazing. And it's interesting hearing that backstory. And I think it's equally as unique as everyone else's. I mean, there's all sorts of different stories we've heard coming from there. So the first film school student we've had in the world of analytics, but it's definitely not abnormal, to be honest, coming from all these different walks of life. I think one thing that I've noticed that there's the thread that ties all this stuff together is that kind of infinite levels of curiosity and just the drive to just be like, sure, I'll give it a go. Maybe, and then I'll either do it or I won't, and I think there's the kind of people that are either, no, this is outside of my responsibility and I'm not going to do it, versus the kind of, whatever, I'll do it, SEO, ads, marketing, analytics, now we're talking things like legal and consent, and we're talking about warehousing and clouds, like just, sure, whatever.
Sure, yeah. No, I think Walter Isaacson, is he the biographer of like Steve Jobs and Elon and stuff? So he did all of these biographies, and I think he was in a podcast once and someone asked him a question, what connects all these people? So what made their success? And he just basically went to curiosity. And looking at what I did, I always wanted to find out why this happened. So this is how I got into analytics. Oh, why is this happening? Oh, let me see if I can find that out. Oh, and how is this working? Oh, why aren't we doing this? And you just basically start putting all the pieces together until you've got the entire board set out, and you know exactly, because you put every single piece there, you know exactly where it needs to go and why it is. And yeah, it's fun.
I think curiosity for me is now tied to the TV show Ted Lasso. Has anyone seen it?
Yes.
Yeah,
Ted Lasso.
I'm a huge Ted Lasso.
What an incredible show.
Yeah.
So Ted Lasso, that scene where he's playing darts and he's talking about how he got to where he got to, and people always underestimated him. And it was that quote he saw by Walt Whitman or whoever on the wall that said, "Be curious, not judgmental." And so now that's my, whenever someone talks about curiosity and like about those kind of things, that's what my mind goes kind of there. So Tim, you're talking to us today about the psychology of data, and you often hear about the psychology of user experience, psychology of buying, psychology of data, whatever. This is the first time I'm coming across the concept of the psychology of data. And Dan, I don't know if you've come across it before, maybe you have, but would love to get a feel for, what is psychology of data and how is it different to psychology of X?
So the name of the concept I came up with because I read the book, The Psychology of Money, and it was just probably some of the best life advice that I ever got was in that book. And I just started thinking about, okay, so if I want to talk about, so I started doing data storytelling. So this is why we ended up doing Crap Talks. And I ended up thinking about, okay, so if it's data storytelling, again, this is all these pieces of the puzzle that come together. If it's data storytelling, you also need to know how to use data to talk about all these things. And because it's influencing people's psychology, what was the origin story of it? It was basically, I was in a meeting with the performance agency at the time, the place I was working at. I think it was the last meeting that I had before the COVID lockdowns. I remember because we were doing like the silly like foot shake. If you... I'll never forget that. So basically it was like, oh yeah, we can't give hands anymore, so we'll just like do this little foot thing.
Oh.
So
we went elbows.
yeah.
I was going to say, in England, we went elbows.
No, somehow in Belgium, I don't know, it was a TV show or whatever, and everyone was doing this for like the 2 weeks or the 10 days before they went like, no, that's it, stay in house. So it was the last meeting before that, and I was just, all these meetings were absolutely dreadful, all of them. So there were probably 12 or 15 meetings before this one, which were all the same. It was always 3 hours long. It was always a rundown of numbers. I was working for an energy company at the time. We were spending probably somewhere between 100 and 200,000 euros every single month. And they were running it down. And if I came out of that meeting and I would run into my boss, and my boss would ask me, so what did I get for the 100 to 200,000 euros? I would have had to gone, fuck if I know. So that's probably not a good idea to have these meetings. And so I was sitting in this meeting and they were boring. Like I was mentally checked out, and I just went like, no, we need to, I'm done having these sorts of meetings. I'm done with not being informed, not understanding what you're trying to tell me, or being shown like cherry-picked data where you did a good job, even though we're not seeing any returns, but there was a lot of engagement, or vice versa. And I just started to think, okay, so what can I do? Well, I've got basically measure camps where I can talk. I've got like a website where I can write, which I ended up doing for like at least 5 blog posts, as everyone who does. So I've got LinkedIn, and slowly but surely it sort of matured into how can I help people. I know how to tell stories. How can I help people tell stories with data so that people end up at a better place where they started off? I think I listened to, like I said, a couple of your episodes, and you did one on data literacy, and I was like very happy because all of you went, yeah, if you have to, data literacy is including presenting conclusions and taking actions. I liked Bav's Confucius Zen approach as well. So that was very nice. But again, it's the same thing, like presenting conclusions and taking actions. What annoyed me about the 3-hour meetings was, one, obviously it was too long. And it was just basically like a rundown of numbers, like that's up 23.6% and that's down 22 and this is 10,600, and like it's too much. I'm like pretty into data, and I was mentally checked out after 30 minutes. So that obviously can't be the ideal situation. I feel like I've been rambling on now for quite a while.
No, it's you absolutely. I mean, to be fair, I couldn't agree with you more on some of these, on all of the things you said so far. I've sat in those meetings where people are sort of like running through these numbers at lightning speed. This is up, this is down, without providing any context. Like, is that good? Is that bad? Like, did we expect it to go up? And has it gone up in line with the expectations, or why has it gone up? And all of these things are just completely overlooked. And so you started putting together this program to share at Measure Camp and so on and so forth. In between this horrendous meeting you were in and you going to Measure Camp with this hilarious talk that you put together, did you get a chance to put this into practice where you were like, you know what, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to try some of these storytelling methods, and I'm going to try presenting data with context? And if you did, how was it received?
So yes, in my personal reportings, they're always like this. So they're basically at most 2 or 3 numbers. If I do present data, it's usually graphed out. So it's usually a graph, so you can see. So you have context, you have timely context. Is it up? Is it down? Is it compared to another data set or data point that we want to compare it to? What was the target? So all of these, basically, if you see a dashboard of mine, you can basically in 5 seconds see, are we doing great? Are we doing bad? What do we need to talk about? Which is exactly what you want. You basically want this conversation to be very short because, being in the position that I'm in now, my day is pretty busy. So I've got online campaigns. Are we going to do offline campaigns? What are we going to do with the website? So this particular bit of what Performance Max is going to do, for example, that's just one small thing that I need to talk about. So yeah, with agencies, I always introduce these concepts. They always take them and then they do it right the first month. But then there's always like this, it's like agencies feel uneasy to not show data. So basically what they think is just pile on more numbers. If we pile on more numbers, people will trust us more because there's more data that they can look at. So the job I was before was for a Belgian fashion brand. And we were introducing the brand in Germany, and we had a German agency, and I had a call with our account manager. I said, like, listen, so the CEO is basically a shoot from the hips type of guy. And then the CDO was very analytical. So she was very with the calculator and like typing away, looking at numbers. So I said, like, what the last thing you want to do is show a slide filled with these boxes with numbers in. And she's like, yes, absolutely. We shall. And so the meeting starts. I have to step out of the room for some reason or other. And I step out, I take a call, I come back in. The first thing I see is like a slide with 16 gray boxes filled with numbers. And so I look to my right where the CEO and CDO are sitting, and the CEO is basically on his phone. I'm like, I wonder what Manchester United did today. Oh, nice. And the CDO is typing away at our calculator going like, oh, 300,000 visits, 600,000. Oh, how does that compare to this? Oh, what kind of type of ratios can I make of this? So obviously nothing of value is going to happen there. This meeting just went on and on and on and on because, yeah.
Is that because the idea is that more is more, right? And so if you pay lots of money for something, you need more stuff in return. And actually, it's not about quality, it's about quantity in a lot of cases.
So in this particular case, the launch wasn't going that great because it takes, like, Germany's a big market. And so it takes a lot of budget to corner even a little part of it. So the launch wasn't going that great. So this should have been a pretty straightforward like decision. But because they made it like, well, we did a lot of work. So yes, there aren't any sales, but we reached this many people and we'd shown them this many ads and the frequency was this, and then we did that. And so all of these things just basically made the image murky. And instead of talking about what we can do, because there were things that we could do, what we could do to improve this particular launch campaign, we ended up talking about whether or not a frequency of 4 was good. Like, that's not, what are we even talking about?
So, Tim, I have a question for you, and I suppose this is the kind of the devil's advocate side that Bav normally takes, but I think I want to jump in and take this side. So, I get it, I'm on board, and we've all been in those meetings, and I like the idea of what you're coming at from this psychology of data. But I'm wondering then, so how is this different from pre-existing concepts such as like data storytelling or the kind of the literacy that you mentioned that me and Bav have spoken about? What is the psychology data? How is that different from renaming that aspect of it?
So it actually came from pretty early on. I figured out that so I had all these questions on how can we make this sale in reporting meetings? And I suddenly realized that we already figured this out, because basically these are all marketing questions. These are all things that we do in our day-to-day work when we're not talking about what the results were. We basically use concepts like anchoring, which you can do. So anchoring is a concept where you show. So Steve Jobs made this famous by first leaking that the iPad was going to cost $1,000, I think. And then in the presentation, he had this gigantic slide. Like, he's standing in front of it and it's $999. That's what's being said that this new iPad is going to cost. And then he just switches to the next slide and goes, no, we shall sell it to you for just $499. And the audience erupts because it's like half off. But this product didn't exist until 5 minutes ago for most people. So he anchored the idea of $999. And everyone's like, $500, this is amazing. Like, is it? Is it really? Because Apple's margin is upwards of 60%. So it's probably easier to get it a lot cheaper, but everyone just lost their minds because it was half off. That's a concept like anchoring, which is a psychological concept that you can use. This is an arrow in your arrow kit or your toolbox, a tool in your toolbox to make a number seem bigger or smaller. Yeah.
But I'm trying to put that into the context of, you're in a meeting, you're with a CMO or CFO or CDO, whoever CEO, how would you apply anchoring in this situation? I get it from a product perspective, right? You want people to pay a certain amount. So you first allude to the idea that it's going to be higher. If you want your conversion rate to be 10, right, you're not going to say, it's like, oh, well, the conversion rate could have been 5%, but actually it's 10%. Like I'm trying to figure out how this would work.
So you could use, for example, the averages in the industry. So the conversion rate, like you say, the average in the industry, the conversion rate is 5%. And that's the first thing that you show. And then you go, well, our conversion rate, 9.8%. That's nearly double what the industry average is. Or you can look at past performance. So, for example, our conversion rate last month was 5%. Our conversion rate right now is 10%. So all of the optimizations that we did worked. So works in all sorts of ways. So, yeah.
But in those instances, so in the instance you use with Apple, which by the way, that's a great story. I know that story. I think I remember it from your talk, and I think it's a fantastic story. They're trying to sell something, right? They're trying to sell a product price that still generates some 60% margin. But in the instance of being in a boardroom or a meeting room with your colleagues, you're not trying to sell anything. Maybe you are. I haven't given it more than like 10 seconds of thought at this stage. But you're not trying to sell them. You're trying to get information across that starts conversations, that like indicates the health of where things are. Like what is the value of anchoring in this situation? Okay, compared to industry averages, that makes sense. But if you're just looking at past performance, and also on the flip side, what if your conversion was down? How would you I'm trying to figure out the purpose of using psychological methods in a data space.
Okay, so you are actually trying to sell something because you've got a plan of action, you've got a solution, you've got your version of the truth that you're trying to get across. So that's what you're trying to sell. You're not trying to get obviously credit cards out, but you are trying to make sure that they implement or even just listen to what you have to say and then start a conversation. So that's how you would use it, how you would use like all of these psychological marketing tricks. Basically, you're selling an idea. So if you're selling an idea, you can use marketing tricks. That's as easy as I can make it. Yeah.
Okay. No, I love it. I've been trying to think if, next time I'm sat with a client or as an internal stakeholder and I'm trying to make it a bit more. I think for me, I've always tried to keep data exciting. I've sat in exactly those boardrooms that you've described where, people are just like, this is up, this is down. And you're just like so bored and you're switched off, and you don't blame someone with half the context you have to switch off as well. So,
yeah. And so sometimes it's not just like using these psychological tricks to make a number seem bigger or smaller, or to sure that people see growth or that they get sort of the general idea. Sometimes it's as easy as, which I did a couple of months ago, is just basically get people to get out their phones. We had an issue where on mobile, there were no conversions. None. They were selling trainings and there were no conversions on mobile. So we started looking into it. And so we started using Google Analytics as to what is the drop-off point? Oh, well, people are still using the menu. Okay, so people are still using the menu, but then nothing happens. Okay, so then we started hotjarring. So we did hotjar and we looked at all of these scroll maps. It didn't really say why there was nothing happening, except for one particular thing, is people were scrolling almost all the way to the bottom of the page, that the pop-up that was being shown. And then they didn't do anything. So basically, because of that, we figured it out. We got into a meeting with all the stakeholders who were supposed to build the site, got everyone to take out their phones and went like, okay, so go to a product page. Yeah, go to a product page. All right, now click open the more information menu. Okay, click open more information menu. Okay, now scroll through it. So it's a wall of text. We will fix that one later. That's also a problem. But now you're interested. Okay, how do you sign up? Well, oh shit, there's no sign up button. And because we got all of these people, we could have done that with the hotjar and with the presentation, but because we got everyone to get out their phones and experience it, they experienced it. Then they noticed like, this is very frustrating because I'm interested and now I have to find a way to close the tab and I have to go to the main menu and have to see if I can do with contacts or where do I sign up for this thing? And it's that sort of thing as well that I always advise, is to get people to experience the problem, not just show the problem, but get them to experience the problem. Because if you've got the experience, you've got basically the empathy with the end user that you're trying to achieve.
So for things like, first of all, I love it. I agree, and I think that's definitely the best way of getting a point across. Where my head's at, I think, a little bit is that I'm very similar in a similar world to you, Tim, in the kind of the marketing world. And I'm just thinking that it's very hard to experience an ad nowadays, especially with things like Performance Max and the kind of algorithm doing a lot of the stuff. And you've got a lot of faith in the big black box of the different walled gardens and things like that. I'm just wondering then, how do you translate an experiential thing to something as abstract as we actually don't know what happened, but here's some numbers that are now modeled because we can't be certain there either. And I think we've got a return on your investment. And this is as far as we know, and we've done as much as we can. So I'm just wondering, like, where the future of experience goes when actually, as marketers, we can't experience the marketing itself.
Yeah, so that's a good question because I've got actually a hate relationship with Performance Max. I think it's the most Google of their products. It's like, just give us everything and we'll figure out your business better than you think you do. And they just don't. And then not only do that, this is actually a good point. They don't present anything of value to you. So basically you had this many impressions. You had this many, I don't even think you've got clicks. I think you've got it, they call it interactions now. So interactions are clicks and video views. And I think the email stuff also has its own title. Then there's like the attributed things, which is basically everything because Google measures it. Yeah, for me, it highlights a problem with how Google reports on Performance Max. Because like you say, we upload 20 images. Which image is performing better? They don't tell me. We'll just show you the most performing image better. But that's basically it. I think there's like a Performance Max script where you can export all of that stuff to Drive, where you can look at it. But even that's very, very limited. But it just highlights that it's not giving you any value as an end consumer here.
But these are the products, right? And I think this is the interesting thing, is that is there could be as much want and need and desire to do this from an analyst perspective or from a marketer's perspective, but the fundamental technology they're using doesn't allow them to even be able to present the data in a meaningful way. I'm just wondering then, what are the options on the table? I mean, my
To stop
I get
advertising with
stuck in the kind of
Performance Max.
yeah, just spend the money elsewhere. If only that was that easy. The thing with this kind of stuff is I've got a couple of frameworks I always use when I'm speaking to people, especially maybe junior analysts or people kind of getting into the industry for the first time. I always kind of reiterate the idea of the 5 whys framework. I don't know if you've come across that. And it's basically, you get a number and you just ask why 5 times, and then you finally get to uncover the truth by the end of it, right? And I think these kind of frameworks are really useful. I'm just wondering if that is the approach, then, rather than being able to get at the data itself to be able to uncover those yourself, you're actually going to have to be like, we believe this would have had an impact, and using this kind of modeling, because it feels, if this kind of like where this industry is going, and to be able to get hold of that data and to analyze it succinctly, even to do things like machine learning models or using approaches to stuff like that, which would actually get you back to where we were before in the Wild West. It just feels so out of reach for a lot of marketers. And actually that's now kind of like behind the wall of having a team of people dedicated to this. I'm just wondering, for the lay people or the SMEs, what option do they have but to report on what's being given to them and assume it's good, doing well?
Okay, so I'll tell you what I like to do. And first of all, anyone who's been in the industry pre 2010, this is basically where we were in 2008. Where we're heading is basically where we were in 2008. So this feels very familiar to me. So for me, or my framework for measuring things throughout the funnel is actually pretty simple. We have certain things that we expect out of campaigns that we run. So for example, a Performance Max campaign, I want to see direct conversions because it's literally bottom of the funnel. Shopping campaigns, same thing. I want purchases, I want revenue. If it's, let's say, a Facebook campaign or a more of like a top of the funnel campaign, I can't expect anyone to make a purchase. Like, how do you use Facebook? You're on the train, you've got 5 minutes, you're basically scrolling, oh, like a nice cat video. Ooh. Ooh, Uncle Bernie's being crazy again. And then there's like an ad for healthy food. And then you go like, oh yeah, healthy food. Yeah, I should really do that. What's it called? Oh yeah, those USPs. And then you just scroll past it. And at night you go like, what was a healthy food site again? So you type in Google. So basically what I want from Facebook is, did I get add to carts from this thing? Did they click it? Did they see things on the website? That's the sort of thing that I try to look at. So we basically split it in a couple of things. And I think it's folly to think that you can trace a purchase back to an impression that someone got from a Facebook. Well, first of all of these attribution models are only click based, especially if they're cross channel. They're only click based. So are you saying Facebook ads don't work? Because then TV ads don't work. And I know for a fact that TV ads do work. So it's this digital thing where if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And you saw that when Apple rolled out ATT, and all of these game companies suddenly didn't see like the return of install and the return of all these purchases. They all stopped advertising on Facebook. Now I can guarantee you one thing. 2 companies didn't stop advertising on Facebook and they grew market share, whereas the other ones didn't. The reason for it is the other ones thought, well, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. But that's just simply not the case. It's just you can't measure it. So it might just still exist. And you'll have to take a little leap of faith and see what happens. It doesn't feel like an answer to your question. Feels like a lot of rambling.
I think the whole, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. It's probably not driven out of the belief that it doesn't exist because you couldn't measure it. I think it's driven out of the one's inability to quantify it to someone else. Right. So you go back to your situation where you were, you left the boardroom and someone asked you, what am I getting for my money? And you had no idea. I think it's the fear of that. Whereas with TV, okay, I think TV has been something that we've always not been able to measure accurately anyway. Like we have models and we do sort of econometric modeling and uplifts and things like that. And, we have methods that we try to use to analyze it. But when we talk about digital, we've always been able to directly attribute behaviors to spend and outcomes to spend. And suddenly when you take that away, people aren't thinking like, oh, well, is there some type of model that we could use to show the spend and the return on the investment based on the spend here? I want to go back to kind of like more classical psychologies of data stuff. I think I came into this call with a whole bunch of things that I wanted to understand, like what drives behavior. And I want to go back to that point around the CEO was on the laptop. The CDO was kind of like making like frantically typing away. Do you think this has something to do with the way we process data? And actually, when I refer back to your talk on storytelling, it was, I think the way you talked about it was really around, let's make it a bit more fun. Let's start with the beginning. Let's have a middle. Let's have an end. I think I recall you using the Disney framework where you have the start and then you introduce a problem and then and there's that, and then you get to some type of outcome. With data, do you think one of the challenges of it and the need to talk about things like psychology of data is because of the way we as humans, the way we interpret data is very different, and that has a part to play?
Yeah. So I like a quote from Nancy Duarte, who wrote Data Storytelling as a book. And she says, like, data, we always say like the data speaks for itself. And the thing is, it rarely does. If I send you an Excel file, all 3 of us are going to take different conclusions from the same Excel file. So basically, if you're presenting towards a board, or if you're presenting towards your peers, or if you're presenting as an agency towards a client, you have to take these people along for a story of what you want to tell. So basically, you have to know where you want to get to. What do you want out of this particular meeting? Is it a decision? Because if it's a decision, you basically have to show people exactly what you want and how you got there and where maybe paths not traveled, to make sure that like I'm not just saying to you that we need to do this. No, we looked into X, Y, and Z, but they all sucked, and for these reasons. And I'm just going to show you like we can use A and B, and A's advantages are these and B's advantages are these. You have to take people along on that ride and how you got there. So what I say, by the way, come see me at Measure Camps. I have a slide there about Jurassic Park. And basically, what does a good story need? Well, a good story needs a hero, a compelling hero that we can root for. This is something that we want to achieve. It needs a, a desperately evil villain. This is something we want to avoid. There need to be life or death stakes, right? So the stakes need to be high. So if you're coming to me and say, I can improve your conversion rate by 10%, I'm like, okay, thanks, I guess. But quantify, like, if I improve your conversion rate by 10%, this means that we will probably end up selling €1 million more this year. And I'm like, oh, €1 million. This is something we can work with. So life or death stakes are very important. And then most probably the most important thing is taking people on a ride. So this is what I was saying about before. Like, we looked at this and we looked at that and we did X, Y, and Z, and make people discover what you're trying to say. If you get people to take that ride with you and you show them like, oh, so in film, they have like shot A plus shot B equals thought C. And so that's what you want. So Chris Nolan's excellent at this. There's, by the way, a podcast that I can recommend where he talks about this in Oppenheimer. And basically you can do the same in your reporting. So you basically have shot A, shot B.
Do you not run the risk of like unconscious bias coming into it? Let's go back to your example, right? You have a story you want to tell. You're telling that story because there is some outcome that you want to achieve. If I stick to your storytelling example, Karate Kid is one of my favorite movies, right? In the movie, Daniel is the good guy and Johnny Lawrence is the bad guy. And for years, I believed that. Then I went and watched this show called How I Met Your Mother. And in that, one of the main characters sees Johnny Lawrence as the good guy and Johnny Lawrence as the good guy and Daniel LaRusso as the bad guy. And then they made a spin-off series called Cobra Kai, which looks at the story from Johnny Lawrence's point of view and how he never actually saw himself as a bad guy. And it got me thinking a lot because, like, when we talk about, when you're talking about narratives and getting to some outcome, there is always a bias, and it's hard to tell as the receiver of information, am I being subjected to some type of bias? And I think, okay, when numbers are presented as boring numbers, they're just that, they're boring numbers. But when you add a story onto it, right, there is this aversion, I guess, to that story because there's a risk that someone wants you to extend their contract. If you're an agency, you want more money out the back of it. You want them to put more money in marketing instead of product because you're the marketing manager and you're held more accountable, or so on and so forth. So, like, from a psychology perspective, like, how do you jump through these hoops to ensure that what you're doing stays objective?
So basically, the question that I like to ask, and you can also do this for yourself, is what would I see if this wasn't the case? So what would I want? What do I want? And then the other part is, what would I see if this wasn't the case? Now, how I come at it is I ask that beforehand of the stakeholders. Like, what do you like? You get a question. What do you want? Well, I want to increase blah, blah, blah. And then you just go like, okay, let's say that it's not possible or it's not the case. What would you see? What would convince you? And they basically go like, oh, well, you would see X, Y, or Z. Now you've got X, Y, or Z to look out for. So if you see X, Y, or Z, you can basically go, well, we've got this information which is in favor, and we can most definitely make that happen. But I have to tell you, we also saw X, Y, or Z. And because they said it beforehand, they've now committed to the fact that it's not your idea. It's not your idea why it's not going to work. It's their idea. So in their mind, it's their narrative that you're now saying. You basically go like, I don't think this is going to work because we're seeing X, Y, or Z. And so that's something that now you've got a conversation that you can have.
So you're kind of using that concept of anchoring, actually. I think this is fascinating because you can use this technique going into the session. Like, hey, before you set everyone up to show them numbers, you set them up for, guys, what are your expectations? And you kind of get them to set their own bar. A bit like, if Steve Jobs had just asked people how much you expect to pay for this, that's in some ways anchoring. And if the expectation that they would automatically suggest around 1,000, you come in at 499. That's a good thing. So here, what you're saying is, do the expectation management, the anchoring up front by asking the questions in terms of like, what do you want to see? What does the outcome look like? What would you do if it didn't look like that? Blah, blah, blah. And then you use that as a trigger point because then it's not your story, you're kind of entering into their story and just supplying them the facts they need, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's one way to do it. And then the other way is it's not, and I think this is important because this is what most people understand, like, oh, you have to show less numbers. So basically, we're only going to research the things that we're going to show on screen. And that's not how it works. You still have to do all of the other numbers. But it's not because you have all the numbers that you need to put them on screen or that you need to mention them. But if someone asks a question, you need to be able to be prepared and go like, oh yeah, this. So there's I think probably one of the most like mind-blown podcasts that I've listened to was with a Swiss guy. This is an interesting life story by itself, but a Swiss guy who ran NASA. Thomas Surbruggen or something like that. Anyway, I'll make sure that I'll send you the link so you can link it in the show notes. So basically it's 2 hours on a decision thing because this guy, he's the one voice who does $2 billion projects. So you want to go to Mars? The only person you need to convince is Thomas Saarbrücken, whatever, Thomas. And he says like, oh, I'm an astrophysicist, but I don't know nothing about rockets. I don't know nothing about how to keep people alive on the moon or send stuff to Mars or beam things back. But I do know that when people don't know, they'll suddenly freeze. And so what he does is, okay, so we want to build a rocket. And you come again with the 5 whys. And so he starts digging and digging and digging. So he doesn't do 5 whys, he does 20 whys or 30 whys. And if you at Y6 suddenly go like, oh yeah, we believe maybe, he goes like, oh no, you haven't researched this enough. Now he goes like, research this better and come back and introduce it to me. And so it's not that he doesn't want to approve this particular project. It's that he doesn't feel comfortable spending $2 billion and then watching things blow up once they leave the launching pad. It's a mind-blowing podcast on how to make decisions and how people at that level think and how you can structure your presentations to appeal to these people.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to definitely have to get the link for that and put it in the show notes. And we're kind of very rapidly approaching time, unfortunately, Tim. But I did want to ask you one last thing, because I know I can tell from your LinkedIn profile, at very least, that you've been involved in the Measure Camp scene in Brussels for a good number of years now. So just very quickly, how do people find out more about Measure Camp Brussels, and when's the next one? Is there one scheduled, and how do they get a ticket?
So it's at brussels.measurecamp.org. There isn't one scheduled yet. We are going to do one. We used to have them in October. We went to a new date at the beginning of December. So it's probably going to be the first weekend of December, pending venue approval. And yeah, do come along. And again, it doesn't matter where you are. There is now a Measure Camp probably near you at least once a year. You don't have to be crazy like me and a couple of other guys who travel to, I think, 5 or 6 a year. It's definitely worth it to meet people and to talk to people and to get ideas and fresh perspectives. And this might also be important for people who are looking to increase their data storytelling skills. You can basically present, you can fuck up, no one's going to notice. Everyone there wants you to succeed, and you can try to present your presentation. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely a fun favorite of ours. And yeah, and some incredible stuff. I think both me and Bav did a talk on the last London one, and yeah, found it awesome. Actually, just there's no 2 words about it. It's one of the best meetups. Obviously, other than Crap Talk. Sorry, Bav. Other than Crap Talk.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Crap Talk is pretty good. Okay.
Yeah, pretty good. Okay, I like that. Well, we had I'll link in the show notes as well. We actually spoke to Peter O'Neill on this podcast of the early days, episode 28, if I remember rightly. So we'll put a link to that if you want to hear the story of how Measure Camp started and where it got to today. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, we've got our rapid fire questions now, Tim. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat. And this is normally Dara's favorite thing to do, but as he's on holiday, I'll be taking the reins for this, and just to put you in the hot seat. So, Tim, what is the biggest challenge today that will be gone in 5 years' time?
Ooh, good question. I think that's going to be attribution, basically because we've got all these guesstimate machines that'll, at a certain point, get it right. There's too much money that's being spent there by Facebook and by Google and by all these people spending billions. Yeah, that would be my guess.
That's definitely a good guess. We'll see. We'll come back in 5 years, eh? So if that will be solved in 5 years, what will be the biggest challenge in 5 years?
A different side of the same coin, which is believability, because obviously, unless Google and Facebook start to work together, you're not gonna know. Both of these are still going to report that you got 100 sales in total, and they both delivered 90 of them. So
If you could bust one myth, what's the myth you'd like to bust?
this is going to be slightly controversial, but the myth is that data is the difference maker between being successful and not being successful. And now people always go like, oh, what do you mean? Well, what I mean is it's not the difference maker. It's table stakes. Like if you don't have good data, you're in for a pretty rough ride and a bad time. But it's not the difference maker. The difference maker is going to be your creativity. So what I can only hope is that all of my competitors are going to sign up to, which is inevitably going to happen this year. So what I can only hope is that all of my competitors are signing up for all the Google and Facebook creatives, because they're all drowned in a sea of sameness. Meanwhile, ours will be handmade and stand out from the crowd.
Oh, I like that. And so it's slightly similar, but it gets interesting differences in terms of response. But if you could wave a magic wand and make everyone in the industry know one thing, what would it be?
Bounce rate and time on site and pages per visit are the same metric, just reported differently.
I love it. I love it. And this is the last question, and then you're off the hook, Tim. So, what's your favorite way to wind down when you're not being a CMO?
Watching films, obviously, yeah.
I assume Christopher Nolan is the favorite there, Tim.
So yeah, right now he definitely is. So I usually have these phases. I think probably a couple of my favorite cinema going moments are, there's this moment like purely for gimmicks and for popcorn enjoyment. I think Peter Jackson's up there. There's a scene in King Kong where the heroine is crawling over rocks, being chased by a T-Rex. And you can see like the T-Rex moving in the foreground, but just the top of its head. And meanwhile, he gets like, and this is again life or death stakes. Meanwhile, at the end, he gets like at the background, he gets like a second T-Rex opening its mouth and just covering her. And I'm sitting there in my seat going like, oh, this is great. And then you've got like Oppenheimer, which is the opposite end of the spectrum, where you've got basically two stories that are being told at the same time. They have a similar ending. Both of these guys have their lives ruined in a meeting. And the way he just stacks everything up so you don't notice it until the very end that's what's happening is just mind-blowingly great.
Amazing. Well, thanks for the recommendations, and we'll definitely be sure to check them out. I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet. I was on the Barbie
God,
train,
no,
and
no,
we didn't have
no.
time to go and do two.
Oh, no. You're definitely missing out. You're missing out, yeah.
Well, last thing, Tim, if anyone wants to find you, find out more about the psychology of data or anything to do with where you work, how can they do that? Where do they go? And what should they say?
Best on LinkedIn. I used to be on on the Birdchan website before the owner turned it crazy, but now I'm just on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much, Tim, for your time and for your patience in us getting this in the calendar. I'll put everything in the show notes for all of our listeners. And yeah, I'll see you at the next Measure Camp.
All right, see you then.